Welcome. I'm really fortunate to have my son here with me. We're going to talk about unhealthy coping mechanisms, perfectionism, codependency, and substance abuse. We'd like to ask you that you watch all the way through in order to get the most out of this podcast. We get to talk about the healing that happens at the end. If at any time it becomes too much, remember, give yourself a break and come back when you feel ready. We are so glad you're here and hope that the message inspires you to continue taking one step at a time on your transformation journey. Remember, healing is not linear. Enjoy today's podcast. Welcome to It's Your Story to Tell podcast. This is episode 2, and I'm here with a really special guest. He's my son, Brantley McDonald, and I'm just so honored to share this space with him and give you a little bit more insight into our life and the journey that we have been on as a family and as individuals. And the goal of the It's Your Story to Tell podcast is to openly talk about hard things so that you can see the journey is not easy, but it's possible. And we want you to be inspired and find hope that you can heal and create the life that you truly desire. So I just am so thankful for you joining us and listening, and I hope that you find a blessing and it will help you to overcome wherever you're at in your life. So, you guys, if you listen to podcast 1, you heard about my story. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about how hurt people, and that when we don't do our work, that we pass things down. And a lot of times, those are unintentional. There's people who've experienced trauma of abuse by parents. And in this case, this was a little bit more covert, and it was just passing down these perfectionism and putting a lot of stress on our home to show up and look a certain way, and there wasn't a lot of space for being able to share feelings and emotions. And so Brantley, just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you're doing, and then let's hear about how I passed things down that weren't so helpful in your life.
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say I like the opportunity to be on this podcast. I'm excited for it, and hopefully it all turns out pretty well. But a little more about me is I'm 20 years old and been on this personal development journey for about a year and a half now, and came a long way, but nowhere near where I want to be. Took me a while to finally realize, that I had a problem or that there was problems in my life. And it also took me a while to finally get to a place where me and my mom were able to communicate in a healthy way. Mm-hmm. So I'm definitely looking forward to talking about some things and talking about how I was able to make that pivotal change in my life. And so, yeah, looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, I think you hit on something so important when you're talking about how this is a journey and that we're never fully arrived at until this life is over. And, that is hopefully an encouragement to each and every one of you listening, because I know for me, I was always thinking about this is the destination. I've got to accomplish this. I'm an achiever. And I had to realize it wasn't just about checking the box and accomplishing things, but it was about learning and growing and becoming better. And that I'm never done with that. And so I hope that people listening, we're not sitting here as experts and having it all figured out. We're just wanting to share kind of where we have been and where we're going. And then communication is such another important thing to talk about, because when we have experienced such hard things and negative emotions, it's hard to have words, and there's a lot of triggers around that. And in family relationships, we tend to trigger each other. But Brantley, tell us a little bit about before the pivotal moment. You mentioned a pivotal moment. Well, what were some of the things in your life that, looking back now, you realize were problems, or can you identify any themes, that beliefs or narratives that were leading you to make choices? Yeah.
Well, the biggest part in my life that I can think about was just the idea of perfection. I mean, I can remember from a very early age that everything had to be perfect. Especially, I mean, we used to get family photos taken quite often, and I remember being a little kid, if our clothes weren't just perfect, like, it was a fight, and, if we weren't standing just right, and just everything had to look perfect. But in reality, nothing was perfect. Our life, I mean, there was a lot of chaos, and it was a normal life, but the image of perfection was like something that was like really drilled into us at such a young age. And so growing up, like, there was the stigma over our heads, me and my siblings' heads, of like, this is what perfection looks like, and you gotta be perfect, and life's not perfect. And so
mine was far from it, in fact.
Right. And so, it was really hard to be perfect, because there's no such thing as perfection. I mean, everybody like strives for perfection, but there's no perfection. So I really struggled with, like, my mom wanting me to be perfect, but knowing I'm not. And I got to a point where I basically just didn't care about the image. And so I started making some poor decisions, and didn't really, I mean, I've always kind of had like an idea of my life, how I kind of wanted it to go, but I wasn't going in the direction that I have always wanted. I was just making a lot of not smart decisions and whatnot. And, it was pretty, at the time, it didn't seem like, a problem. It never does. It never seems like in the moment that what you're doing is the problem, but looking back, there's definitely a problem.
So, yeah, perfectionism was definitely, I think, a theme that I can see not only in my life, but in generations, in trying to, in some ways, it's just a coping mechanism of, there's a lot of hard things and you're not strong enough or not willing to face it. And so you don't want to really admit that it's there. I know for me, there were beliefs and kind of narratives that had been established in my mind that led me to perfectionism. Was there any belief that was kind of implanted with my perfectionism in your life?
Well, I think there's the belief of like, this is how you're supposed to live your life. And, that's just not how it was. And, I remember having conversations with you and my dad about like what I was doing was wrong. And I remember always saying, I'm not doing anything that anybody else isn't doing. And, well, that's pretty much for the most part true. I mean, I wasn't doing anything that, at least at my school, any high schooler wasn't doing. I mean, I was partying and having fun and kind of just was slacking in school, and with that, like, school was never really like my strong suit. I mean, I did well in school when I applied myself, but I had a hard time applying to myself in school, because what I've always liked was working with my hands, and I wasn't very good with sitting in the classroom and paying attention. But that was like something that I remember like was almost like a requirement. Like, you guys, one thing I will say, you guys never pushed on me was like the idea of having to go to college, but you guys definitely like really pushed on me that like I do have to do really good in high school and like get good enough grades to, and it's not that I couldn't get good grades, because when I had a reason to, I would. I mean, I remember whenever it was football season or wrestling season or whatever, my grades would spike to, good grades. But the rest of the year, when I didn't have like that drive to want to do better, I just didn't. And it was definitely something that was definitely pushed upon me, was just like, you have to do this a certain way. And sometimes I ended up getting to the point where I was like, I don't really care what they think. I'm just going to do what I want to do. And ultimately it led to me getting sent away to a boarding school in Montana. And that was really hard for me to do that. Because I felt one, kind of like betrayed by my parents, because I felt like they had given up on me and given up on like wanting to be a parent. Because I remember specifically my mom saying one time, like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't control what you're doing, which is probably true. I mean,
do we really ever control anything?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
But like, I felt like, you're my mom, and same with my dad. But my dad was a part of all of this, but not as much, just because he lived 3 hours away. So he was a part of it, but it was mostly something between you and me, just because I was living with you and we were together. But I felt like, you had just basically been like, I can't be your parent anymore because you're too bad of a kid or whatever, And that was kind of difficult to wrap my head around.
Well, I want to just say for 1 minute, I remember those moments, and while I'm sure I didn't have the right words, it was never that I wanted to give up on being your mom. While I had started my journey years before that point, and I was in a better place, when I just felt like I had tried everything to support you and love you, and it never seemed to matter. And I was kind of at the end of myself, and actually recognizing that I couldn't help you in this place was a heartbreaking place for me to be, because I had to admit that I needed help. And for someone who struggles with perfectionism and wanting it all to look well, this was a really significant point in my own recovery journey to acknowledge I need some help, and I need someone to come in, and I am a lot of the reason that you have your trauma. And I work with people who are 13, 20 years old, and I can help them, but I couldn't help you in that place, because I triggered you, you triggered me. And so that's the value of having a professional, whether it's a coach or a counselor or somebody that can come alongside your kids when you can't. And it's not a matter of, failing as a parent. It's more about recognizing that I had to stop doing what I was doing in order to break this cycle. And so I know I can see how it would come across in that way to you. And, it breaks my heart and it makes me sad. But at the same time, I'm celebrating where we're at, today and what that transition did in both of our lives, because it was a place where I realized I had been trying to control you and control so many things. And, I remember throughout our parenting journey, I wasn't there to listen to how you felt, because your feelings made me feel insignificant and that I didn't have it all together, and a lot of shame. And so I wanted you guys to cap those off, not express them. And there will be a pivotal moment. There will be a breaking point. I shared about my breaking point last podcast, and we don't get here overnight, from the way the generational trauma gets passed down through, my family line and your dad's family line. And then we get to continue or do something different. And it's really painful when you start doing things different. And so tell us a little bit about, what did you learn? Was there anything good that ultimately did come out of that experience, even though it was really hard and you felt in some ways abandoned?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, back to the whole kind of, sometimes it's hard hearing it from your family. It's very true. I mean, your family's the ones that care about you the most, but they're also the most judgmental, most cases. And so, I mean, it was definitely one of those instances where, like, I knew you loved me through the whole process, but I did still feel abandoned because of what I had explained. But but ultimately, like, looking back now and where we're at in our relationship now, like, I do see where you were when you were making those decisions. Like, I understand now, but at the time, I still had so much hurt and healing and just work I needed to do that I was seeing with, a one-track mind, and I just seen it as, like, she's just giving up on me. She's just going to send me away to Montana, middle of nowhere, Montana, which, I love Montana. It's beautiful. I mean, it wasn't that was the problem, but it was just the whole, oh, you're sending me away. You don't want anything to do with me. Like, and that was a bit of a hard thing. And I also, kind of felt like my dad also, like, because my dad wasn't, like, 100% on board with sending me away. Like, he was like, well, like, let him live with me. Like, let's try and, like, maybe that change will help. And who knows if it would have or not.
Sure.
That's in the past. Doesn't matter anymore. I mean, it's important, but, like, regardless. But I felt like he also kind of abandoned me too, because I feel like he kind of just, like, even though he wasn't really wanting me to go to Montana, he kind of just, like, caved into, like, the pressure you put on him, because you also put quite a bit of pressure on my dad to, like, do it. And so I felt like he kind of just, like, gave in because he was tired of dealing with you. And so I definitely felt kind of like forsaken or whatever from my parents. And it was hard, going to that school and being away from my family and my friends, most of all at that time of my life. It honestly harder to be away from my friends than it was my family at that point in my life. And it was definitely a different experience. And even though it was only a short period of time that I was there, because, you know, if I would have been younger, it might have been a longer time that I was there, but was going to be turning 18 in September, and I went there like June, early June, so I was only going to be there for about like 3 months, give or take. But at the beginning, like, it was really difficult being there, and like my whole mindset was just like, screw this place, like, can't believe my parents sent me here. Like, all these people here are like here for worse things. Like, I mean, there's people there for drug addiction, and like not just like, you know, smoking some weed or whatever, like serious drugs, you know, from all over the United States. There was people there for like gang violence, just all different walks of life. And I was like, I'm just here for, you know, partying a little too much and whatnot. So I felt like very out of place. And I thought that I didn't need to be there, because what I was doing was not anything out of the ordinary for a high school kid who would never say was like the most popular, but more popular athletic sports, just kid. And I just felt like I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just having fun and enjoying my high school years and whatnot, and I didn't realize the effect it had on me. I remember we had to write journals, the entries at the end of every day there, and I remember my first journal entry was basically just like, F this place, I can't believe I'm here, whatever.
Yeah.
And and it was probably about like 3 weeks to a month of like those type of journal entries. But from the beginning of the journal entry to like my last day there, even in those 3 months, you could see a huge shift in my thinking about the situation and about the place that I was in.
Yeah.
And I was not a fan of the place, but towards the end of it, I was actually like enjoying myself at times. I mean, it was still hard. And maybe part of why I was enjoying it more towards the end was because I was getting closer to being out. And I was getting closer to freedom or whatever, you know. But I definitely my mindset definitely changed while I was there. And I did gather like a lot of really valuable tools that I didn't necessarily apply right away, like whatsoever. Because, you know, after I got out, I moved to Tri-Cities and was living there, living with my grandparents. And, you know, I started going to CDL school so I could get my license for driving like semis and stuff.
Right.
Because like I said earlier, like I've kind of always had like an idea of how I want my life to go, and it's always been like a big love of mine of like heavy equipment, tractors, excavators, big trucks.
Makes total sense,
from
because
my
your grandpa
early ages.
was, you know, loading you up in your car seat in the dump truck before you were a year old, taking you to the donut shop, taking you to the job sites.
Yeah.
You had all the heavy equipment, tools, and things to play with. And so it makes sense that you know, from a young age, that there was a passion there. And I just wanted to say, you know, you passion and purpose are so key to transformation. And you even talked about that when you were talking about school. You know, when you had a purpose, football and wrestling and those things, that the purpose motivated you, right? You had the capabilities inside of you. And then when you had a purpose, it all came together and you were able to accomplish. Your goal was to be able to play those sports, right? And then you're talking about how you're finding your purpose in who you were created to be. And no, it wasn't college for you, but there was something inside of you. And as you have grown in that purpose and you have followed it, you're able to walk out and do the work, right? So for those of you who are listening, you'll see it in my content, in my courses, but knowing your why and having a purpose, living in your strengths is key to your success, because otherwise life is hard, even when you're trying to do the right and best thing. And so I just wanted to highlight that, because as you shared your story, it's so evident. Keep watching and keep learning. We're going to look forward to being with you on episode 3, where we're going to have one of my really closest mentors. Shelly is an amazing woman who got me to go to that recovery meeting and has been such a blessing in my life and has an amazing ministry now that she's going to share with us. So join us next week, and we'll hope that you have an awesome week of transforming your life. This podcast is intended only for educational, inspirational, and entertainment purposes. The purpose of this podcast is not to replace the counsel of a physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional. If you or someone you know is struggling or in crisis, help is available. Call or text 988 or chat 988lifeline.org. New podcasts every Friday. Listen and subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. If you're ready to start your own transformation journey, visit meganbabcock.com.